Hello, Follower fam, and welcome back to the Follower podcast. We're in our series on Advent called The Coming, as we enter into the tradition of Advent and look at both the second coming of Jesus, when all things will be consummated in Him, when all things will come to their fulfillment in the return of the King, and also the first coming of Jesus that we celebrate at Christmas as He arrives in a manger in the form of a baby. Takes on flesh, incarnates Himself with us, Emmanuel, God with us. And we are building week by week a beautiful hope and expectation so that we can arrive at Christmas with wonder. And I hope the past two episodes on hope and peace have been helpful for you. This one is called You're Not Supposed to Clap There. Reflections on joy in an age of anguish. And so I want you to imagine with me. I love the arts. I love musical theater. Man, the other day, a couple of months back now, I was actually in London, and a friend of mine was so kind. We went to watch West End, and on the West End we watched Guys and Dolls, and Guys and Dolls had this immersive kind of audience experience, and we were watching from one of the balconies. And I actually used to do some amateur musical theater back in the day, around 1920, and I actually played a character called Nicely Johnson in the play Guys and Dolls. So I'm watching the show on West End, and I know all the lines and I know the songs, and there is the song right at the end of the show called Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat, and Nicely Johnson sings it, and I remember having sung it many years ago. And so I am standing there, and I'm just absolutely blown away by what's happening. And anytime I go to musical theater, I basically can't, that phrase, on the edge of your seat, describes me so well. It's like difficult for me to just stay in my chair because I get so excited. And then I'll walk out of the show, I remember the first time I ever watched on West End, I watched the 100-year anniversary of Les Mis. And I walked out of that show like high. I was so excited, and I just wanted to sell everything I had and go join some kind of theater company so that I could do what I saw those people doing. And, you know, every time I've gone either on West End or anywhere else, watched theater, it's very much the same experience. And I remember one time, this wasn't actually a musical theater experience. I went to go watch the Durban Philharmonic Orchestra, and it was my first time ever going to watch an orchestra live. An incredible experience. I don't know, we live in an age of sort of digital music and pop songs, and these things are great. Like, this is good music, but back in the day when you had to write these scores and there was layer upon layer of music and different instruments acting in harmony with one another and different pieces playing different pieces at different times, and how it all comes together in this kind of crescendo of just glory. Man, it is an incredible thing. And if you've never been to watch an orchestra, I would highly suggest you go and watch a live orchestra. Incredible thing. Anyway, so I go with my friend. I'd never been to watch an orchestra before. And so what I didn't understand is that an orchestra has like movements, there's like parts to it, and then there'll be some silence, and then the next movement happens. And like orchestra etiquette is that you kind of wait for each movement to come, and then there's an appropriate time to respond with applause. But nobody told me that. So being this sort of overzealous, exuberant human being that I am, I'm sitting there and I'm watching this first movement of the orchestra, and guys, it is mind-blowing. Like, I still struggle to believe that human beings can do that. And I am being so stirred in my emotions and in my body, and I am like, it feels like there's something rising up inside of me. And I literally, it's like they didn't have to ask for applause. I was waiting for a moment when I could just respond with what was happening to my body as this music was coming and washing over me in this moment. And so the first movement ends, and there's this little gap of silence, and before I know it, I am like applauding and cheering, and I am the only one doing that. Because orchestra etiquette, that was not the time to applaud. That was the time to kind of quietly sit, let it sink in, and move on to the next movement. But I didn't know. So there I am, overflowing with celebration, while the rest of the audience just kind of looks at me and clearly is thinking to themselves, this guy, he doesn't belong in places like this, which may or may not be the case. But I loved the orchestra. And next time I go, I'll know when to clap and when not to clap. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because today we're talking about joy, the third movement in Advent. And joy, again, similar to peace last week, it's one of those words, you throw it out there, it's got so many different connotations for so many different kinds of people in different kinds of places. Because we live in a kind of superficial age, and even you think about Christmas, right? Joy is used as a kind of marketing tagline, and the image we get is of like a cheery Santa Claus laughing and stroking his beard. And here's what I'd like to say. Sometimes we draw too strong a distinction between joy and happiness. The classic definition is that like joy is resilient to external influence. So happiness is a state of well-being that's dependent on external influence. So if things are going well, if our environment's good, if our relationships are good, if things are happy in our life, then we can be happy. But joy is something much deeper than that. Joy is something that exists in spite of circumstance, and there is truth in that. That is true to a degree, but joy and happiness are linked, right? So they're not completely separated. If anything, joy is a deeper experience of what happiness is kind of pointing to. In fact, C.S. Lewis, I'm going to quote him twice in this episode. He's got this one phrase I love. He says, I sometimes wonder whether all pleasures are not substitutes for joy. I sometimes wonder if not all pleasures are not substitutes for joy. In other words, anything beautiful, good in our lives, anything that brings us pleasure, is it not maybe pointing to something deeper? And is that thing that it's pointing to not joy? Kind of that wellspring, that overflowing gratitude in some sense that pours out of us when we have an experience that pulls it out of us, yeah? And similar to what I experienced with the orchestra that day, I was overcome by something. Something captured me. Something stirred me to awakening. And joy is what poured out of me in that moment. And joy can be disruptive, right? You think about, there's that story of David dancing in his underwear or naked in the courts, and he's a king. And so there's a certain decorum that's demanded of kings. And then he goes, man, I'm going to become even more undignified than this, because what he's encountered something in God that is causing him to overflow with joy. And sometimes we get into these places where we're talking about God, where we're talking about relationship with God, where we're talking about being connected to God, what Jesus has done for us. And we can become so familiar with this stuff that it doesn't stir joy in us anymore. Like, you can sit flatlining through a sermon about how you've been rescued by Jesus, and not even like a blip on the radar of joy can register in our lives. And when that starts to happen, it's really indicative of the fact that we need to reassess how we are relating to our faith, because our faith should produce joy in us. Now, quickly to say, what joy is not is the absence of pain. Right. Actually, grief and joy are interesting partners. I was going to call this episode Joy in an Age of Grief, but I changed it to Joy in an Age of Anguish, because actually there is in reality, in the world we live in a now and not yet kingdom, there's this kind of relationship between grief and joy, where grief almost carves the hollow into which joy flows. And so there's kind of like a dance between the two. And so joy isn't the absence of grief, isn't the absence of pain. It's just that there's a river, there's a stream that's flowing underneath us that strengthens us from within, similar to how hope works, similar to how peace works. But joy, quite specifically, it does overflow in a response, right? Joy pulls something. Joy kind of emerges out of us like an erupting volcano. One of the things I was playing around with for this episode was maybe calling it striking oil, right? You're drilling, and then you hit oil, and that oil comes gushing out of the surface. And because it's flowing, it has effect on everything and builds industry around it. And lives are changed and people are drawn to it. And even think about in Johannesburg, where I came from, where I grew up, it's one of the only capital cities in the world that isn't built around a body of water. And the reason that is because the Witwatersrand gold reef was discovered there. And so there was a gold rush, and people came from all over the world, really, and all over Africa to come and get the gold. And so there was something of real value that called forth a response from people. There was an overflow, and it affected change around it. Joy is kind of like that. Joy is a response. Joy is an overflow that happens in our lives when we encounter something. And we see this in our Bible story. Here in Luke chapter 2, we see the birth of Jesus, and you probably will know the story that Mary and Joseph are looking for somewhere for Jesus to be born. There's no room in the inn, and so they go to what probably would have been less like our sort of mantelpiece nativity scenes and more like a sort of maybe a cave or something that we might refer to more as like a shack in our context. And so they're there and they're among the animals or whatever that looks like. And it's not a romantic, starry night with a warm fire and some eggnog. It isn't that. It's refugees looking for a place to give birth. And man, giving birth is a really traumatic experience. And so into this context, Jesus has now been born, and we pick it up in verse 8. And let me read this to you. In that same region, in the region where Jesus has just been born, there were shepherds out in the field. Now, I want you to track a theme here real quick, because one of the gifts of Jesus is that he tells us who God is. And we'll talk about this in the next week's episode, is that it's hard to know God, but Jesus has made him known, right? And one of the things Jesus consistently teaches us, remember last week, that when Jesus is resurrected from the dead, the person who meets him outside the tomb is a woman. Really important, because women were often very low in social ranking in that time. It's why the marriage was such an important thing, because that was a large part of their economic security. And so women weren't high in social status. It was a very patriarchal context. And so the fact that Jesus chooses to appear first to a woman outside the tomb, very, very significant, particularly when you hold it in balance with the entire biblical narrative and how Jesus and God, really the heart of God, seems to have a preference for those who are on the margins, those who don't benefit from the power structures of the age, from the empire realities, that Jesus and this kingdom that he's building is a kind of upside down kingdom where the least of you are the greatest, right? And so here are shepherds, again, shepherds low in social ranking. These would not be the kinds of people who are invited to banquets or parties. They're not in the in crowd. You wouldn't find them on the cover of magazines. They're margin people. But in the appearing after the birth of Jesus, the people the angels choose to appear to are shepherds out in the field. That tells us something about the Father, tells us something about the nature of God. And they are keeping watch over flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appears to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear, which, by the way, is often how people respond to angels, which is probably the appropriate response. Again, when we think about angels, sometimes we've got a very Valentine's Day card picture of an angel, some kind of chubby baby with a Cupid bow chilling on a cloud somewhere. But you read in the scriptures what angels are and just the power that they are representing and how the glory of the Lord is shining around them. Think about what the glory of that covered the weight of God, where Moses says to God on the mountain, "Show me your glory." And God's like, "Dude, you see my glory and you're going to die. Your body will cease to function just in the presence of my glory." Okay, and so here are the angels, and they're surrounded by the glory of God. And so the shepherd's response is to fear. They are filled with great fear, which is a healthy response. It means your pulse is beating, right? It means that you're awake to the moment of what's happening. And even right here, just to pause, part of the reason why maybe some of us are not dialed into joy is because we're not dialed into fear in a way, or awe or reverence. Maybe part of the reason why joy isn't bursting up from our inner being is because we've lost sight of the holiness and the glory of God and just the miracle of what it is that Jesus has come to communicate and to do in his arrival, in his coming. Okay, so think about that. If you're low on joy, where are you on reverence? Where are you on awe? What has the glory of God done in your life recently? And so this angel then says to these shepherds, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people." It's okay that you're on your face right now. It's okay that you're trembling in a holy fear. But I'm saying to you, don't be afraid, because I haven't come to bring fire. I haven't come to bring brimstone. I'm not striking you with lightning. What I've come with is good news. And this good news is good news of great joy. And not great joy for some people. This isn't the kind of good news that's only good news and great joy for those who can afford to pay for the parking to get into the building, for those who can bring their tithe or have a shower so that they're respectable at church. This is good news and great joy for all people, perhaps in particular the kinds of people who don't find good news and great joy in the systems of the world. And so I bring you this good news and great joy that is for all people. Why? For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ, who is the Messiah, and the Messiah is the Lord. So here's this good news. What is the good news? That a child has been born today. And this child is the Messiah that you've been waiting for. And this Messiah is the Lord of the world. And this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased." Can you see the overflow of celebration that is pouring out from the heavenly places over the shepherds in this moment? Sometimes we feel like our excessive response is too much when we're caught up in a religious idea of trying to appear to have it all together, appear to be measured and reasoned and mature and calm. But what we don't realize is that heaven is a glorious riot and we are missing out on the party. Yes. If we're trying to keep it respectable, okay, if we're trying to keep it within the boundaries of reason and good manners, sometimes we eliminate ourselves, we disqualify ourselves from the eternal celebration that we're invited into. Sometimes that's why the kingdom belongs to the children. There's many reasons that's true, but one of them is because children can access joy. And so there's this rapturous celebration that's pouring out in the Spirit. It's joy and it's life-changing. Continues. When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in their heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen as had been told them. And so here we can see a response, right? There is this appearance of the angels. There's this declaration of a message, this good news of great joy for all people. And the shepherds don't just sit there and stare at one another and be like, "Huh, that was nice." What do? They go to where they've been told to go to. Let us go see this thing. And when they see this thing and they tell the other people about it, it stirs wonder in these people. So now you can see that this joy that they're carrying is not only for them, it starts to become infectious. That joy pours out. And it's so wonderful that Mary, it's almost like fragile treasure that she's hearing. She takes all these things and she stores them up in her heart, and she ponders them before the Lord. Right. So good. And then it says that the shepherds leave rejoicing and glorifying God for all they had heard and seen. What are we seeing in this picture? We're seeing an encounter that stirs a response, and that response is kind of like an overflowing stream, and that response, that overflowing stream, that great joy affects change, not only in these shepherds, but in the people that they go and communicate these things to. And perhaps this is why that we learn that the joy of the Lord is our strength. And perhaps friends, joy is the revolution. Perhaps joy is the revolution in an age of anguish, where when you speak with people, the expected response is one of a downcast soul. The expected response is one of cynicism. The expected response is one that kind of amplifies the brokenness of a fading world. Could it be that the strength of the church is in its joy? Could it be that the strength of the church is in its overflowing, joyful expression in light of the miracle of Jesus? Maybe the revolution sounds like laughter. Again, not devoid of grief, not devoid of pain, but right there in the midst of it, something deeper, more robust, something stronger, something to which all pleasures are pointing. This thing we call joy that responds to the miracle of Jesus. I don't know about you, but I want to live in that kind of joy. So how do we get it? Well, here's our final quote from Uncle C.S. Joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. Wow, stop there. Joy is never in our power, and pleasure often is. In other words, you and I can do things that bring us pleasure, momentary relief to the deep need of our soul. That's why we scroll Instagram, by the way. That's why we're getting addicted to the kind of doom scrolling, scroll hole anomaly of our age, because what's happening is we're getting our dopamine fix. Pleasure is the way that we give our deepest longings. We give them over to, prostitute them to, in a way, cheap thrills of lust and sex, right? Of addiction, of alcohol, of money, of whatever the situation is. We build these pleasures. Pleasure is within our reach, but joy isn't, right? Joy is never in our power, even though pleasure isn't. So because we want to stay within the realm of our power, we often settle for pleasure when what we're really craving is joy. But then C.S. Lewis goes on to say this. He says, if you want to get warm, you must stand near the fire. If you want to be wet, you must get into the water. If you want joy, power, peace, eternal life, you must get close to or even into the thing that has them. And that, my friends, is the miracle of Jesus. Because joy is not this abstract thing that kind of hovers out there like some kind of eternal mist. Joy is a person. His name is Jesus, and he has invited us into himself, into that divine dance with Father, Son, and Spirit. He's invited us to come, and he has made a way. In his coming is our coming. As he arrives, so too we arrive into that fellowship. And it's as we abide in the joy that joy overflows from within us. You see, some of us have grown cold to the miracle of who Jesus is. That's why some of us need to pray that prayer in Psalm 51, return to us the joy of our salvation. And the reason why we've grown cold is because we've only taken a quick glance at Jesus, but when in reality, we need to get in to Christ and Christ to be in us. We need to abide in him. We need to sit again at the miracle of the incarnation of Jesus, of what he's done, and allow that to stir fresh joy within us. Because joy is the revolution. Joy is the revolution. And what do I mean by that? Isaiah 35, verse 1-6, and we'll end here. This is an image of the revolution. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not, behold. Your God will come with vengeance. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, where they lie down, the grass shall become reeds and rushes, and a highway shall be there, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. As we end this episode, I know, you're not supposed to clap there. There in the midst of your disappointment, there in the midst of wars and rumors of wars, there in the midst of economic difficulty, there in the midst of hopes that have been deferred, there in the midst of achings and longings, I know you're not supposed to clap there, but can I tell you something? That the water is flowing in the desert. There are streams in the places you least expected. And if you'll see the miracle of Jesus again, if you'll abide in him, I believe he wants to give you the strength that is the revolution. I believe he wants to pour out his joy. If that's been helpful for you, you can go to www.wearefollower.com. And you can subscribe, because every week we're sending out a little devotional thought and some reflective exercises to help you go deeper into this idea of joy. And so until next week, when we look at the final episode in our Advent series, here's my prayer. I pray that you may see the orchestra again, that you may hear it. I pray that the music of the miracle of Jesus would apprehend your heart, so that you, like me and all of God's children, would stand up and clap in all the wrong places. I pray that you would enter into the joy that is the revolution.